If you've ever walked through a house built before the Civil War, one of those old federal-style farmhouses, or a heavy limestone townhome in Philadelphia or Boston, there's a good chance you've stopped in front of a door that didn't quite make sense. It's too small to be a bedroom, too deep to be a coat closet, and when you knock on the back wall, it sounds hollow. You probably assumed it was just old construction, bad planning, wasted space. But what if it wasn't wasted at all? What if that room, that strange, windowless, centermost room, was the most deliberately engineered space in the entire house? What if it was placed there with a precision that most modern architects couldn't replicate today? And what if the people who ordered it removed, who bricked it over, walled it up, and then buried it under drywall and copper pipe, knew exactly what they were destroying? Before 1870, virtually every home built in the Western world contained what builders, masons, and the families who lived inside them called the spirit room. It wasn't a room for ghosts. It wasn't superstition. It was technology, ancient, sophisticated, and deliberately erased from the architectural record within the span of a single generation. This is the story of what it was, what it did, who destroyed it, and why. 150 years later, the walls of your own home are still waiting for a sound that no longer exists. If you love the hidden history of America that nobody taught you in school, subscribe right now. Hit that bell. We go deep on the stories they buried. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because this history belongs to every corner of this country, and I want to hear from all of it. To understand what the spirit room actually was, you have to first understand what the world sounded like before 1870. And I don't just mean the absence of cars or television. I mean the fundamental acoustic architecture of daily life. A sonic environment so different from our own that most modern people have no frame of reference for it at all. Every town in pre-industrial America, every village in Europe, every settlement from the Atlantic seaboard to the Ohio River Valley was anchored to a specific localized frequency. That frequency wasn't chosen by committee. It wasn't broadcast from a government tower. It emerged organically from the landscape itself, from the particular stone of the local quarry, the moisture content of the regional soil, and the geological substructure on which the settlement had been built. And the primary resonator for every community was its bell. Specifically, the great bronze bell that hung in the church steeple, the courthouse tower, or the civic square. These were not mass-produced instruments. They were precision-cast objects, and the knowledge required to produce them was one of the most jealously guarded craft secrets in the Western world. Foundry families in England, France, and the Low Countries passed their formulas from father to son across generations. The precise ratio of copper to tin, the exact temperature of the pour, the specific depth of the cooling pit, and, crucially, the way the finished bell was tuned to harmonize with the stone of the local quarry from which the town itself was built. A village in the limestone hills of Kentucky vibrated at a different fundamental frequency than a granite-founded port city in Massachusetts. A town built on the red clay of Virginia resonated differently than one sitting atop the bedrock of the Hudson Valley. Every place had what you might call a ground tone, a baseline frequency that permeated the soil, the stone, the timber, and the air, and the bell was the instrument that expressed it. When that bell rang on a Sunday morning, or at noon, or to signal a fire or a funeral, it wasn't just producing a sound that traveled through the air. It was activating a resonant system, a feedback loop between the bronze of the bell, the stone of the buildings, and the crystalline limestone and granite of the earth beneath everyone's feet. Researchers studying ancient Greek Orthodox architecture have documented this principle in remarkable detail. In 2016, a team of acoustic engineers used precision sine wave sweeps to map the sound behavior of centuries-old stone churches. What they found confirmed what medieval builders had long understood empirically. These structures were not passive containers for sound. They were active instruments. Architects had deliberately embedded hollow clay vessels, called achaea, into the walls and domes of churches to amplify specific resonant frequencies. The reverberation times of great cathedrals were not accidents. They were the result of centuries of refinement, with builders adjusting the proportions, the mass, and the materials of their structures to sustain and amplify the precise frequencies of their local bells. Gothic cathedrals, and in other words, were giant tuning forks built from stone, and so was every house that stood in their shadow. The spirit room was the residential equivalent of the cathedral's acoustic core. If you spend enough time in the basement archives of old American cities, in the municipal records offices of Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, or New Orleans, you begin to notice something strange in the floor plans of homes built between 1750 and 1870. Tucked near the geometric center of the structure, almost always at the precise point where the primary load-bearing walls converge, there is a small windowless room. On some plans, it is labeled a still room. On others, it is simply left blank, an intentional void in the geometry. Architects and historians have typically explained these spaces away as pantries, storage areas, or the remnants of old dairy rooms. But the evidence tells a different story entirely. And these rooms were almost always constructed from a different grade of stone than the rest of the house, typically crystalline limestone or a fine-grained granite, chosen not for its structural properties but for its acoustic ones. The walls were unusually thick, often twice the depth of the surrounding construction. The ceilings were vaulted in a shallow dome or pointed arch, and the room contained almost nothing. No shelving, no hearth, no windows. Just the structural pillars that anchored the house to the earth, and in many cases, a simple stone bench along one wall. The oldest American homes that retain these spaces, and there are still a few dozen documented examples scattered across New England, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, have a quality that visitors consistently describe in the same terms. The room is perfectly silent, yet it feels charged. Sound doesn't echo inside it the way it does in a tile bathroom or a bare hallway. Instead, the room seems to absorb vibration and hold it, the way a tuning fork holds a tone after it's been struck. This is exactly what it was engineered to do. The spirit room was the house's resonant center. When the village bell rang at its ground frequency, that specific pitch matched to the local stone and soil. The vibration traveled through the earth, up through the foundation, through the crystalline limestone of the spirit room's walls, and into the living spaces of the home. The room acted as an amplifier and a filter simultaneously, stripping away the chaotic surface noise of daily life and delivering the clean, low-frequency ground tone of the community directly to the people who lived there. Think of it this way, that every house in the village was, in effect, a smaller version of the great church bell tower, and the spirit room was the house's bell chamber, the hollow interior space where resonance lived. The people who built these homes weren't mystics. They were engineers working within a tradition of acoustic knowledge that stretched back to ancient Greece, to the Roman architects who built amphitheaters using the same resonant geometry, to the medieval stonemasons who knew that a building was not truly finished until it could hold a tone. The name Spirit Room came not from any association with the supernatural, but from the older English and German concept of spiritus, breath, the animating force. The spirit room was the place where the house breathed. It was the lung of the structure. the cavity that allowed the building to participate in the living resonance of the community around it. And for centuries, that's exactly what it did. In 1859, the French government did something that had never been done before in the history of human civilization. They passed a law dictating the pitch of music. The diapason normal, as the decree was called, established a legal standard for concert pitch, setting the note of A at 435 vibrations per second. For the first time in history, a government had decided that the sound of the world would be uniform, centralized, and controlled by legislative statute, rather than by the organic resonance of individual communities. It sounds on its surface like a minor bureaucratic footnote, the kind of administrative detail that fills the footnotes of musicology textbooks and interests almost nobody outside of an orchestra pit. But look at what happened in the decades immediately surrounding that decree, and the picture that emerges is not minor at all. Between 1850 and 1880, straddling that 1859 legislation like the hinge of a door, the world's acoustic reference system was systematically dismantled. In Europe, the revolutions of 1848 had already begun destroying the old church infrastructure. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 accelerated the process. Across the continent, church bells were melted by the hundreds of thousands and recast as cannons, as industrial equipment, as the raw material of the new industrial economy. Historians have documented the destruction of at least 425,000 European church bells in this period, each one a precision acoustic instrument, each one a unique resonant reference point for its community. In America, the story was different in its details, but identical in its outcome. The Civil War consumed an enormous quantity of bell bronze. The great fires that swept Chicago, Boston, and other American cities in the 1870s destroyed bell towers by the dozens. And the new building codes that emerged from those fires, codes written and enforced by the expanding apparatus of municipal government, quietly but decisively prohibited the construction of hollow resonant chambers in private residences. The official justification was fire safety. Hollow spaces, the new codes argued, served as flues, channels through which flames could travel from one part of a structure to another. Eliminating them made homes safer. This argument was not entirely without merit, but consider what the new codes replaced the spirit rooms with. And they replaced crystalline limestone with gypsum board, a material that acoustic researchers consistently describe as acoustically dead. They replaced resonant hardwood floors with subfloors muffled by heavy industrial carpeting. They replaced the massive load-bearing stone walls thick enough to hold a low-frequency standing wave, with thin wood-framed partitions. And into the spaces where the spirit rooms had been, they inserted the infrastructure of the new industrial age, gas pipes, then electrical conduit, then the copper plumbing of the emerging indoor water system. In 1936, the United States Bureau of Standards began broadcasting a 440 Hz reference tone as the new national pitch standard, replacing the last remnants of the old local tuning systems with a single frequency chosen by a committee in Washington, D.C. The local voice of America went silent. The national broadcast took its place. What was lost in this transition was not merely a matter of aesthetics or nostalgia. The old bell founders, the hereditary craftsmen who had spent generations learning to cast instruments matched to specific geological locations, found that when they tried to rebuild after the wars and the disruptions, the knowledge was simply gone. They could produce bells that looked identical to the old ones, but the bells no longer resonated with the stone of the cathedrals. The relationship between the instrument and the earth had been severed, and no amount of technical skill could restore it, because the technical skill had always been inseparable from the accumulated knowledge of place. In 2016, A small but carefully designed study exposed 33 volunteers to music played at two slightly different frequencies, 432 Hz and 440 Hz. The differences between these two pitches are imperceptible to the conscious ear. You could not walk into a room and identify which one you were hearing, yet the physiological results were measurable and consistent. The volunteers exposed to the 432 Hz recording showed statistically significant decreases in heart rate. They reported feeling calmer, more focused, more present. The 440 Hz group showed no equivalent effect. This was a single small study using recorded music. Now imagine the implications of living, sleeping, working, and raising children inside a building that vibrates at a frequency chosen by a government committee, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year across an entire lifetime. This is not a fringe idea. The relationship between acoustic environment and human physiology is one of the most active areas of research in environmental psychology and architectural acoustics. We know that prolonged exposure to certain frequencies, particularly the 60-cycle hum of electrical infrastructure which saturates virtually every modern interior space, produces measurable stress responses in the human nervous system. We know that children learn better in rooms with appropriate reverberation times. We know that hospital patients recover faster when the acoustic environment of their rooms is carefully managed. And what we have almost entirely stopped asking is the question that the builders of the old spirit rooms were apparently asking as a matter of routine. What is the relationship between this specific building, this specific piece of earth, and the human body that will inhabit this space? How do we engineer that relationship to be restorative rather than degenerative? There is a physical dimension to this question that goes beyond the psychological. The walls of old stone houses, particularly those built from crystalline limestone, which was the preferred material for spirit room construction, are not acoustically passive. Crystalline structures under mechanical stress produce what physicists call a piezoelectric effect. They generate a small but measurable electrical charge in response to vibration. A limestone wall vibrating at its resonant frequency is, in a very literal sense, producing electricity. Not enough to power a lamp, but potentially enough to affect the electrical activity of the nervous system in the people living within it. This is speculative. The research connecting residential piezoelectric effects to human physiology is still in its early stages. But the builders of the old spirit rooms didn't need to understand the physics. They had something better. Centuries of empirical observation. They knew that people who lived in houses built according to the old resonant principles felt differently than people who didn't. They called it being grounded. They called it being in harmony with one's place. We might call it something else. But the experience they were describing appears to have been real. The epidemic of nervous exhaustion that swept through the American medical literature of the 1880s and 1890s, what physicians of the era called neurasthenia, coincided almost precisely with the decade in which the old resonant architecture was being phased out and replaced by the new industrial building codes. George Beard, the physician who popularized the neurasthenia diagnosis, attributed the epidemic to the stresses of modern life, the telegraph, the railroad, the accelerating pace of commerce. He was probably right, but he was also describing people who were, for the first time in human history, living in buildings that no longer resonated with the earth beneath them. They were acoustically ungrounded, and they felt it, even if they had no language to describe what was missing. The spirit rooms are still there. Not all of them. Most were sealed, converted, or demolished in the great renovation wave that followed the 1870 building codes. But in the oldest surviving houses in America, in the stone farmhouses of Pennsylvania Dutch country, in the federal period townhomes of Alexandria and Annapolis, in the limestone manor houses of the Kentucky bluegrass region, the evidence of these spaces persists. Sometimes it's a closet that's positioned wrong, too close to the center of the house, too far from any exterior wall, with a depth that makes no architectural sense. Sometimes it's a section of basement wall that sounds different when you knock on it, hollow where everything around it is solid. Sometimes it's visible in the original floor plans. And if you know what you're looking for, a small rectangular void at the geometric center of the structure, unlabeled, sitting at the intersection of the primary load-bearing walls like a period at the end of a sentence. The acoustic researchers who have studied these spaces, and there are a small but growing number of them, consistently report the same phenomenon. The rooms are silent, not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has a quality to it, a density, that most people living in modern construction have never experienced inside a building. And paradoxically, that silence feels alive. It feels charged, in the way that the air feels charged before a thunderstorm, or the way a plucked guitar string feels charged in the moment before the note begins to decay. This is the resonant potential of the old architecture. Yet the instrument is still there, the stone is still crystalline, the geometry is still precise. It just hasn't been fed the right frequency in 150 years. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is the point where the history of the spirit room is most vulnerable to distortion. This story has been picked up, incompletely, sensationally, by the corners of the internet most devoted to conspiracy and pseudoscience. You can find versions of it claiming that the 440 Hertz standard was a Nazi plot, or that the spirit rooms were portals to other dimensions, or that the government deliberately suppressed this technology as part of a scheme to make the population controllable. None of that is what the documented record shows. What the record shows is more straightforward, and in some ways more troubling than any conspiracy theory, because it happened in plain sight, driven not by malice but by the ordinary forces of industrialization, standardization, and the particular amnesia that attaches itself to knowledge that is embodied rather than written down. The foundry families who knew how to cast bells matched to specific geological locations didn't pass their knowledge on because the market for their work collapsed. The stonemasons who understood how to build a resonant chamber into a residential structure didn't pass their knowledge on because the new building codes made that knowledge illegal to apply. The acoustic tradition of pre-industrial architecture didn't vanish because someone decided to suppress it. It vanished because the economic and regulatory conditions that sustained it were dismantled. And once a generation passes without practicing a skill, the skill is gone. What we are left with is the architecture without the acoustics, the instrument without the music, houses that were designed to be generators of resonance, sitting in silence, waiting for a frequency that is no longer being produced. The question, and this is the question that I think is worth sitting with, especially for those of us who have spent time in old houses and felt something in them that we couldn't quite name, is whether any of this is recoverable. The stone is still there. The geometry is still there. The piezoelectric properties of crystalline limestone don't expire. And the principles of acoustic resonance, the relationship between frequency, mass, and the vibration of crystalline structures, are as valid today as they were in 1840. What's missing is the frequency. The bells that were melted for cannons are gone. The foundry knowledge that produced them is gone. The legal framework that once protected local acoustic traditions is gone, replaced by a global standard that serves the needs of mass-produced instruments and broadcast media, rather than the needs of the human bodies that have to inhabit the built environment. But here is what I want you to take away from this. The next time you walk through an old American city, through the row house neighborhoods of Baltimore, through the Federal District of Philadelphia, through the antebellum squares of Savannah, don't just look at the facades. Look for the voids. Look for the spaces they tried to fill. Walk into one of those old houses if you ever get the chance. Find the closet that's in the wrong place. Knock on the back wall. Listen to what comes back. You might not hear a tone, but you will hear the absence of one. A silence that has a shape, a presence, a quality that your nervous system recognizes even if your conscious mind doesn't have the language for it. That silence is the ghost of the spirit room, not a specter, not a superstition, a physical echo of an acoustic tradition that shaped the daily lives of every generation of Americans before 1870, and that was dismantled so completely, so systematically, and so quietly that most of us never knew it existed. The spirit room is not a ghost story. It is a story about what we used to know and what we chose or were made to forget. It is a story about the relationship between a human being and the specific piece of earth where that person lives. A relationship so fundamental, so biological, that for thousands of years, the builders of homes understood that it had to be designed into the architecture itself, not left to chance, not delegated to a government committee in Washington or London or Vienna, but embedded in the stone, in the geometry, in the resonant heart of the building where a family would spend their lives. That relationship was severed in 1870, and we have been living in the silence ever since. The stone still remembers. The question is whether we are willing to start asking why it's been so quiet for so long. If this history moved you, if it made you look at your own home a little differently, leave a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever stood in a room in an old house and felt something you couldn't explain. I read every single one. Subscribe if you want more hidden American history that nobody taught you in school. We drop new videos every week, and the next one goes even deeper. The buildings are still waiting. I'll see you in the next one.